She
Contract. Let's stick
sold her
to it.
virginity to save a
Less?
life, the only thing
Okay,
value she
just
had left.
contract.
He bought it to possess a unique experience. Neither of them expected the transaction to come with a forever clause. This is the story of how 2 billion Naira became the down payment on a love built from the ashes of desperation. Hello, bestie. Welcome. Please stay with me as I unfold this interesting romantic story. If you enjoy the story, please support us by subscribing to this channel and hit the notification button for more. Thank you. Grab your popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy this story. The air in the Lagos University Teaching Hospital was thick enough to chew. It was a familiar, suffocating cocktail of antiseptic, stale sweat, boiled beans from the visitor's canteen, and the underlying metallic tang of fear. To Adaora Nwosu, at 22, it had become more familiar than the scent of her own cramped room in Surulere. It was the smell of a slow, inexorable sinking. Each day after her shift at the advertising agency, she would make the familiar pilgrimage, her body moving on autopilot while her mind raced with a frantic, silent arithmetic. One more session of dialysis, the cost of the new antibiotics, the specialist's fee that wasn't covered by the laughable skeletal health plan she had. Her mother, Ijeoma, was a ghost of the woman who had raised her, the vibrant, full-bodied woman who could haggle a market trader into submission and whose laughter could fill their whole apartment now lay shriveled against the stiff hospital sheets. Her skin, once the color of rich, dark honey, had taken on a worrying grayish-yellow pallor. Her breath was a shallow, raspy thing, each one a struggle that seemed to cost her a piece of her soul. The heart monitor was their metronome, its steady, soft beep. Beep, beep, the soundtrack to their shared purgatory. To Adaora, it wasn't the sound of life sustaining, but of time running out. Each beep was a single Naira coin dropping from a bottomless purse. She sat on the hard plastic chair, its surface permanently warm from a perpetual rotation of anxious loved ones. She held her mother's hand, the bones delicate and sharp under her fingers, like a fragile bird she was afraid of crushing. "Mama," she whispered, her voice hoarse from a day of presenting meaningless ad concepts for soft drinks. "I'm here." Ijeoma's eyelids fluttered open. The whites were tinged with yellow. A weak, watery smile touched her cracked lips. "Adaora, my child, you look tired. You work too hard for this old woman." The words were a knife twist of guilt and love. "If only you knew how little my hard work actually covers," Adaora thought, but she forced a bright smile, one she didn't feel. "Nonsense, Mama. You're worth it. The new doctor, the one from India, he says we just have to be patient. The new medication." She spun a web of beautiful lies, weaving a tapestry of hope with threads she knew were fraying. A transplant. That was the only real answer. The word hung in the air between them, unspoken. A mythical beast they couldn't afford to even name. The cost was astronomical, a number so large it belonged in newspaper articles about government budgets. Not in the life of a girl from Surulere. A nurse came in, her footsteps efficient and brisk. She checked the foredrip, the catheter, the monitor. Her face was a mask of professional sympathy. "She's stable for now," the nurse said to Adaora, in a tone that implied for whatever that's worth. "The bill for this month's dialysis sessions is at the front desk when you're ready, Miss Nwosu." The words were a physical blow. Adaora just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The beep, beep, beep of the monitor seemed to grow louder, more insistent, morphing from a rhythm into a demand. "Pay up, pay up, pay up." She looked at her mother, who had drifted back into a fitful sleep, her brow furrowed even in rest. The love she felt was a physical ache, a vast, terrifying ocean, and she was drowning in it, armed with nothing but a thimble. The hum of the hospital was no longer just in the air. It was inside her head, a low, frantic buzz of desperation, drowning out everything else. Her dreams, her pride, the future she had once sketched out in her mind. It was the sound of a world shrinking, of options vanishing, until all that was left was the fading woman in the bed and the deafening, desperate hum of a machine keeping her alive, one costly beep at a time. It was in this silence, punctuated by that terrible, expensive sound, that the first seed of an unthinkable idea began to germinate in the dark, fertile soil of her despair. The walk home from LUTH was a blur of honking Danfo buses and choking exhaust fumes. The vibrant, chaotic energy of Lagos, usually a symphony she navigated with instinctual grace, felt like a violent assault on her senses. Every shout from a street hawker, every blast of Afrobeat from a nearby speaker, was an intrusion into the sacred, silent tomb of her worry. Her phone, a stubborn relic with a cracked screen, felt like a lead weight in her pocket. It held the number for the hospital administrator, the one who had called her aside, his voice a low, apologetic murmur, to gently explain that the payment plan had reached its end, that the next round of dialysis, scheduled for tomorrow, required an upfront deposit that was 5 times her monthly salary. The word palliative care had been used, not as a suggestion but as the next logical and only affordable step. The single room she shared with her mother in Surelier was oppressively hot, the air stubborn and still despite the groaning fan oscillating in the corner. It smelled of mothballs, old wood, and the faint, sweet scent of her mother's favorite shea butter, a smell that now felt like a memory. Adeora sank onto the thin mattress on the floor, the one that was her bed, and pulled her knees to her chest. The silence was worse than the hospital's noise. Here there was no beep, beep, beep to anchor her. There was only the void, the yawning chasm of what was to come. Tears came then, not the gentle kind, but great, heaving sobs that racked her entire body. They were tears of pure, undiluted helplessness. She had fought so hard. She had taken every extra shift, skipped meals, worn shoes with soles so thin she could feel the heat of the pavement. She had swallowed her pride and begged relatives who had long since turned their backs. And it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The world was built to crush those without a fortress of money, and hers had been made of sand. It was in the depths of this convulsive grief that the thought first surfaced. It didn't arrive as a flash of inspiration, but as a slithering, shameful thing, emerging from the darkest recesses of her mind. A story Shed once heard whispered in secondary school, about a girl from a rival school who had done a thing to pay her university fees. A rumor everyone had said, scandalized and fascinated. A myth, but what if it wasn't? Her fingers, trembling and slick with tears, fumbled for her laptop. The fan whirred to life, a pathetic sound in the heavy room. The glow of the screen illuminated her tear-streaked face in the darkness. She typed with a strange detachment, as if her hands belonged to someone else. The search terms were clumsy, euphemistic, a dance around the ugly truth she was contemplating. And then she found it. Not a mainstream site, but a shadowy forum, a digital underworld hidden behind layers of vague disclaimers and anonymous usernames. Here, transactions were stripped bare. Beauty for money, time for money, dignity for money. It was a marketplace of desperation, and she was its newest, most eager customer. She created a username, Lagos_Rose, a name that felt both defiant and pathetic. Her cursor blinked in the empty text box, a tiny, judgmental eye. How did one price oneself? How did one describe the one thing she had held on to, not out of some deep moral conviction, but because she had always believed it would be given, not sold? It was to be a gift for a future love, a shared beginning. Now, it would be a payment for an ending she refused to accept. She took a deep, shuddering breath. She had to remove herself from the equation. She was not Adeora, the daughter, the aspiring writer, the woman. She was a product, and a product needed a specification list. Her post was brutally clinical, each word feeling like a self-inflicted wound. Item: Virginity. Reason: critical family medical emergency. Non-negotiable. Offer: serious, discreet inquiries only. No time wasters. Proof of funds required. The price is 2 billion naira. This is non-negotiable. She highlighted the number, making it bold. It was an insane sum, a number meant to deter the vulgar and the petty, a number that, if by some miracle it was met, wouldn't just cover the dialysis. It would cover the transplant, the best specialists, a recovery in a clean, quiet place, and a future without this crushing debt. She stared at the post. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever written. It was a surrender, a white flag raised to the world, admitting that her hard work, her intelligence, her love, none of it was currency that mattered. With a final, silent apology to the girl she thought she'd be, she clicked submit. The page refreshed. Her offering was now live, floating in the digital cesspool, bait for sharks. She slammed the laptop shut as if it were on fire, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. The act was done. She had commodified the last sacred part of herself. And as she sat there in the dark, the only thing she felt was not shame, but a single, clear, devastating thought. I hope it's enough. The inbox became a fresh circle of hell. For 2 days, Adeora's email and the forum's private messaging system were flooded with a torrent of human depravity that made her physically ill. They came in a relentless wave. Crude offers from men who could barely string a sentence together, accompanied by unsolicited, grotesque photos. Pitiful lowball bids that were an insult wrapped in a proposition, and manipulative sob stories from other desperate souls trying to barter one tragedy for another. Each notification chime on her phone made her jump. Each one was a tiny hammer chipping away at what remained of her resolve. She felt stained, her act of desperation now feeling like the worst mistake of her life. She was on the verge of deleting everything, of burying the entire sordid idea and accepting her fate. When it arrived, it didn't appear in the forum's messy inbox. It landed in her personal Gmail. The sender was t.adebayo@adeyemiholdings.com. The address itself was a statement. Adeyemi Holdings was a monolith, a name synonymous with towering skyscrapers in Victoria Island, with telecoms, oil and gas, and a fortune so vast it was a national talking point. The subject line was chilling in its professionalism. Inquiry regarding your proposition. Her heart didn't flutter. It seized. This was different. This was real. She clicked it open, her mouth dry. To Lagos_Ros. From t.adebayo@adeyemiholdings.com. Subject. Inquiry regarding your proposition. Good afternoon. My principal has reviewed your recent proposition and has expressed a serious interest. He has instructed me to arrange a discreet and professional meeting to discuss the terms you have outlined. He is prepared to meet your stated price in full, with funds transferred to an escrow account of your choosing prior to any engagement, contingent on the verification of your claim. If this is agreeable, please indicate your availability for a brief meeting at the Sky Lounge, Eco Hotels V Suites, tomorrow evening. My principal values his privacy immensely, and this venue ensures the discretion you both require. Please advise. Sincerely, Tunde Adebayo, Executive Personal Assistant to Chief Kola Adeyemi. Adeora read it once, then again, then a third time, her eyes snagging on the phrases that made it so terrifyingly real. My principal. Met your stated price in full. Funds transferred prior. Verification of your claim. And the name. Chief Kola Adeyemi. She knew that name. Everyone in Nigeria did. His face was on the cover of Forbes Africa, not in the shadowy corners of the internet where she had been trawling. He was a titan, a man who owned things, and now he was proposing to buy her. A cold dread, entirely different from the hot shame the other emails had provoked, washed over her. This was no longer a transaction with a faceless pervert. This was a business deal with one of the most powerful men in the country. The stakes had just been catapulted into the stratosphere. Could she back out now? Did she even want to? Her eyes drifted to a photograph on her bedside table. Her and her mother, taken at a cousin's wedding 2 years ago. Igioma's face was full, her eyes bright with laughter, her arms wrapped tightly around a younger, more carefree Adeora. That woman was fading by the hour. The clinical, soulless tone of the email was, perversely, what convinced her. There was no lust, no attempt to charm or degrade. It was a contract negotiation. It was a language she understood from her copywriting job. Deliverable, terms, agreement. He wasn't buying her. He was acquiring the experience she had advertised. She could depersonalize it. She had to. Her hands were steady now, the shaking replaced by a numb, icy resolve. This was the miracle she had begged for. It had just arrived wearing a bespoke suit and delivered by an executive assistant. She typed her reply, her words just as stark and professional as his. To t.adebayo@adiamiholdings.com. Subject: Re. Inquiry regarding your proposition. Mr. Adebayo, thank you for your inquiry. Tomorrow evening is acceptable. Please provide a time. I will require proof of liquidity prior to the meeting. Lagos_Rose. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The deed was done. The hook was set. She was no longer just a desperate girl from Surulere. She was a party to a negotiation with a billionaire. And as she sat there, the hum of her laptop the only sound in the room, she realized the hospital's incessant beeping had been replaced in her mind by a new, more terrifying sound. The quiet, efficient ticking of a deal moving forward. The Eco Hotels V Suites was a monument to a Lagos Adeora knew only from magazine pages and music videos. Its soaring atrium, polished marble floors, and the hushed, air-conditioned silence felt like stepping onto another planet. The air here didn't smell of dust and exhaust. It smelled of money, of polished brass, expensive perfume, and discreet wealth. She felt 1,000 eyes on her, though no one actually glanced her way. Her best outfit, a simple navy blue shift dress and low heels, felt suddenly cheap and obvious, a costume for playing a part she was woefully unprepared for. The Sky Lounge was another level of surreal. Perched high above the glittering necklace of the Lagos shoreline lights, it was a world of low, ambient jazz, the soft clink of crystal, and the murmur of conversations held in confident, low tones. The view was breathtaking, a panoramic postcard of the city's ambition, but it only made her feel smaller, more insignificant. A man in an impeccably tailored suit approached her the moment she hesitated at the entrance. He was young, sharp, with an air of quiet efficiency. "Miss Nwosu?" he asked, his voice low. It wasn't Tunde Adebayo, but another cog in the well-oiled machine. When she nodded mutely, he gave a slight, professional smile. "This way, please. Chief Adeyemi is expecting you." He led her to a secluded table in a dimly lit corner, far from the other patrons. And there he was. Chief Kola Adeyemi was more imposing in person than in his photographs. He wasn't just sitting. He inhabited the space around him, his presence seeming to draw the light and silence toward him. He was older than Shed expected, perhaps late 40s, with threads of silver at his temples that spoke of authority, not age. He was handsome in a severe, carved-from granite way, but his eyes were what held her. They were dark, intense, and missed nothing. They scanned her as she approached, not with the leering hunger she had braced for, but with a cold, analytical assessment. She was a business proposition, and he was conducting due diligence. He did not stand. A slight gesture of his hand dismissed the assistant and indicated the plush chair opposite him. "Miss Nwosu," he said. His voice was a low, calm baritone, devoid of warmth or malice. It was the voice of a man accustomed to stating facts and having them become reality. "Chief Adeyemi," she managed, her own voice sounding thin and reedy in the expansive quiet. She sat, perching on the edge of the chair, her spine rigid. A bottle of expensive champagne sat in a silver ice bucket beside the table, untouched. He made no move toward it. This was not a social call. "I trust Tun's email was clear," he began, folding his hands on the table. His cufflinks, simple platinum squares, gleamed in the candlelight. "The terms are as stated. 2 billion Naira, transferred to any account you designate in full prior to our engagement. The transaction will be discreet and will occur once, at a location I secure. In return, you will provide the unique experience you have advertised. Your claim to its authenticity will be verified." He spoke so clinically, so devoid of any human emotion, that it was somehow more shocking than vulgarity would have been. He wasn't buying a night with a woman. He was acquiring a rare commodity, and he was outlining the terms of the acquisition. Verification. The word landed like a physical blow, making her stomach clench. The funds will be available to you immediately upon confirmation. He continued, his eyes never leaving hers, watching her reaction, gauging her stability. This is a simple transaction. There will be no further contact, no expectations, and certainly no emotional entanglements from my side. I require absolute discretion. Is this understood? Adeora felt a surreal disconnect. Here, in this beautiful room, with a man who looked like he should be discussing mergers on CNBC, they were negotiating the sale of her body. The absurdity was dizzying. She wanted to throw her water in his face, to scream, to run. But then she saw it. Not her mother's sickly face, but the hospital bill, the number on the statement from the administrator. It floated in her mind's eye, a stark final digit. She had run out of options. Dignity was a luxury for those who could afford it. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to not let her voice waver. She would match his coldness with her own. It was the only shield she had. It's understood, she said, her tone flat. The money is transferred first, in full. Then the verification. Then the transaction. A flicker of something, was it respect? Amusement? Passed through his dark eyes. He gave a single, slow nod. Agreed. Tund will provide the details of the account to be used and the time and location. Do not be late. He stood then, abruptly. The meeting was over. It had lasted less than 5 minutes. He didn't offer a handshake, didn't say goodbye. He simply turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the shadows of the lounge, leaving her alone at the table with the untouched champagne and the devastating weight of the bargain she had just sealed. She sat there for a long time, staring out at the glittering lights of the city, feeling more alone than she ever had in her life. She had gotten what she wanted. The miracle was arranged. So why did it feel like she had just signed a contract with her own devil? The elevator to the penthouse was a silent, gleaming capsule that seemed to suck all the sound from the world. It smelled of lemon polish and chilled air. Adeora stood rigidly in the center, watching the digital numbers climb. 30, 31, 32. Each one carrying her further away from the Lagos she knew, from the person she was. Her reflection in the brushed steel doors was a ghost. A pale, wide-eyed woman in a simple black dress she'd bought for this specific, terrible purpose. She looked like she was attending her own funeral. The doors slid open without a sound, revealing a private foyer. A single, immense abstract painting dominated one wall, a swirl of dark, expensive colors. The floor was polished concrete, cold under her thin heels. The air was still and scentless, as if the very atmosphere had been purchased and purified. Tund Adebayo was there, as impeccably dressed and impassive as ever. He gave a curt nod. Miss Nwosu, the chief is waiting. This way. He led her through a vast living area. The entire far wall was glass, offering a terrifying, godlike view of the Lagos Lagoon and the twinkling lights of the mainland. It was a view that spoke of immense power and total isolation. The room was furnished with stark, minimalist pieces, a low-slung white sofa, a single sculpture on a pedestal, each object chosen for its aesthetic impact, not for comfort. It felt less like a home and more like a gallery exhibit titled The Billionaire's Life. Chief Adeyemi stood by the window, his back to her, a silhouette against the cityscape. He held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He was still in his suit trousers and a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing powerful forearms. He turned as she entered. His expression was unreadable. Thank you, Tund. That will be all for the evening, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. Tund nodded once and vanished as silently as he had appeared, a door clicking shut somewhere in the depths of the apartment. They were alone. The transfer is complete, Adeyemi stated. His tone as neutral as a banker confirming a transaction. He gestured to a tablet on the glass coffee table. You may verify. Her legs moved mechanically. She picked up the tablet. The screen was open to a banking app. She didn't recognize the interface. It was something private, offshore, discreet. And there it was. The balance. The number was so long it took her a moment to parse it. 2 billion and 73 Naira. The mundane specificity of the extra 73 Naira made it terrifyingly real. This wasn't a dream. It was a bank statement. A cold numbness spread through her limbs. This was it. The point of no return. She set the tablet down. Her hands were ice. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. The verification, he said. There was no softness in his voice, no attempt to put her at ease. It was a next step in a process. She flinched. She had known this was part of it, had agreed to it in that sterile meeting at the Sky Lounge, but the clinical reality of it here, in this silent, opulent room, was a fresh humiliation. She gave a tiny, jerky nod, her eyes fixed on the breathtaking, hateful view. He didn't touch her. He walked to a sideboard and returned with a small, lacquered box. He opened it. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, lay a single, stark white object. It was a medical-grade speculum, cold and impersonal. The message was clear. This was not about intimacy. It was not about desire. It was an inspection, an authentication of the asset he had just purchased. Tears of pure, hot shame welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had sold this. She had agreed to this. She thought of the number on the tablet. She thought of her mother's hand, so frail in her own. She turned her back to him, her fingers trembling so violently she could barely manage the simple fastenings of her dress. The cool air of the penthouse hit her skin, raising goosebumps. She laid the dress carefully over the back of the cold, white sofa, a splash of black on a field of white. She did not look at him. She focused on a single star, impossibly distant, twinkling beyond the glass. The examination was swift, professional, and utterly devoid of any humanity. The cold touch of the metal was a violation that went deeper than the physical. It was the final, brutal confirmation of her reduction to a transaction, a commodity to be checked for flaws before the final purchase. When it was over, she heard him return the object to its box. The soft click of the lid was the loudest sound in the room. She dressed with her back still to him, her movements slow and heavy, as if she were moving underwater. The fabric of her dress felt different now, tainted. When she finally turned, he was watching her, his expression still unreadable, but his gaze was intense. The clinical part was over. The terms were met. Now, the main transaction. He didn't speak. He simply gestured toward a hallway leading away from the main living area. She followed, her footsteps silent on the polished floor. The bedroom was just as stark and impersonal as the rest of the penthouse. A huge platform bed, low to the ground, dominated the room. It was made with crisp white linens. It looked less like a place of rest and more like an altar. He was not cruel. He was not rough. But he was distant, focused, his movements efficient and purposeful. He was a man completing a task. Edoora did what she had promised herself she would do. She detached. She left her body and floated somewhere near the ceiling, looking down on the scene. The powerful man, the slender, motionless woman on the white bed, the city glittering silently beyond them. She focused on the numbers. 2 billion, 2 billion, 2 billion. She repeated it like a mantra, a spell to ward off the feeling of her own soul shredding. It was over quickly. He rose without a word and went into the ensuite bathroom. The sound of the shower starting was a dismissal. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the cold seep from the expensive sheets into her bones. Then, moving like an automaton, she gathered her clothes. She didn't shower. She couldn't bear to be in that space a moment longer than necessary. She dressed in the hallway, her fingers fumbling. She let herself out of the penthouse, the massive door sighing shut behind her with a final, expensive thud. The elevator descent was silent. The lobby was empty. She stepped out into the humid, familiar embrace of the Lagos night, the roar of a distant generator and the smell of roasting plantain hitting her like a physical blow. She stood on the curb, a lone figure under a street lamp, the insane weight of 2 billion Naira in a bank account she could now access, and the crushing, hollowed-out feeling of having nothing left of herself to sell. She had gotten the miracle. She had paid the price, and as she hailed a danfo that would take her back to Surulere, back to the dust and the struggle, She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that the girl who had entered the Eco Hotel that evening had not come back out. The first thing she did was vomit. Not from morning sickness, but from a soul-deep revulsion. She made it to the cracked sink in their surreal bathroom just in time, heaving until her stomach was empty and her throat was raw. The face that stared back from the mirror was a stranger's, pale, eyes shadowed with a new kind of hollow, a ghost wearing her skin. She scrubbed at her body in the tiny, tiled shower until her skin was pink and raw, but she couldn't wash away the feeling of the cold, polished penthouse air or the clinical, impersonal touch. The scent of his expensive soap seemed to have seeped into her pores. But the money was real. The next morning, fueled by a manic, desperate energy, she became a general waging a war against death. Her first call was to the hospital administrator, the man who had spoken of palliative care with such finality. Her voice, when she spoke, was different. It was no longer the pleading tone of a desperate daughter. It was flat, cold, and carried the unassailable authority of immense wealth. This is Adaora Nwosu. Regarding the account for Ijeoma Nwosu, a transfer has been made. Please confirm receipt and proceed with the next course of treatment. Immediately, there was a long silence on the other end, followed by a flustered, "One moment, madam. Let me just, yes, I see it. The full amount? For the transplant list? The full amount," she confirmed, her voice devoid of triumph. It was a statement of fact. "I want the best nephrologist in the country consulted. Today. I will be there in 1 hour." The change at LUTH was instantaneous and nauseating. Where before there had been pitying glances and resigned shrugs, there was now a deferential, almost fearful respect. Nurses suddenly became attentive, checking vitals with renewed vigor. Doctors appeared at her mother's bedside without being summoned, their explanations detailed and hopeful. Ijeoma was moved to a private room with a window that actually opened, where the air didn't smell of collective despair. "Adaora, my child, what is happening?" Ijeoma whispered one afternoon, her voice stronger already from consistent, effective dialysis. "This room, the doctors, it is too much. How can we afford this?" Adaora's smile was a practiced, brittle thing. She had rehearsed the lie until it felt almost real. "A grant, Mama. A miracle. Remember that article I wrote on healthcare access? A foundation read it. They reached out. They cover everything for cases like yours. It is their mission." The words tasted like ash, but they were a necessary poison. Ijeoma's eyes, still jaundiced but clearer, welled with tears. "God is good. He has answered our prayers." She gripped Adaora's hand, her strength returning. "All your hard work, my daughter. It is finally bearing fruit." Each word was a knife twisting in Adaora's gut. Her mother's faith, her gratitude, was a monument built on a foundation of filth. Adaora accepted the praise with a numb smile. The ghost of the penthouse sped a constant presence between them. The money was a magic wand. A suitable kidney donor was found within a week, a process that usually took years. The surgery was scheduled at a state-of-the-art private hospital in Ikoyi, not LUTH. The surgeon, a renowned expert who had trained in London and Boston, was personally flown in and compensated with a sum that would have made a government minister blush. Adaora sat in the pristine, silent waiting room during the 8-hour surgery, surrounded by the quiet anxiety of other wealthy families. She didn't pray. She simply stared at the wall, replaying the cold click of the speculum case, the beep of the elevator, the rustle of the starched white sheets. She had traded those sounds for the skilled hands of this surgeon. It was a brutal arithmetic, and she was forcing herself to believe the equation balanced. When the surgeon emerged, smiling, to say the surgery was a complete success, the relief that washed over her was so profound it was physical. She sank into a chair, sobbing great, ragged breaths that she muffled in her hands. They were tears of joy, yes, but also of excruciating release from a tension that had been strangling her for months. The recovery was a dream. Ijeoma bloomed in the clean, quiet room, with dedicated nurses and physical therapists. The grayish-yellow pallor receded, replaced by a healthy brown glow. Her laughter returned, first as a weak chuckle, then as the full-bodied, joyous sound Adaora had feared was lost forever. "This foundation," Igioma said one day, eating a bowl of fresh fruit. "We must thank them. We must write them letters. I must meet them." "They prefer to remain anonymous, Mama," Adaora said smoothly, adjusting her mother's pillows. "They believe the help is the thanks. They don't want a spectacle." It was the easiest lie to tell. She would leave the hospital each evening and return to the dust of Surulere. The contrast was jarring. She was now a woman of immense means, yet she lived in a one-room apartment with a leaking roof. She couldn't move them yet. How would she explain it? The grant only covered medical bills, not a new life. She had to be careful. She transferred small, reasonable sums to her everyday account, enough to buy better food, new clothes for her mother, to pay their rent a year in advance without raising suspicion. The rest of the 2 billion sat in that cold, digital vault, a monstrous secret. She had bought her mother's life. She had bought her laughter, her future, her smiles. And as she watched her mother grow stronger each day, the vibrant woman re-emerging from the shell of sickness, Adaora felt a terrible schism inside herself. The joy was real. The love was real. But so was the hollowed-out feeling. She had saved her mother's life, but she feared she had murdered the woman she was supposed to become. She lived the life she had bought, a beautiful, miraculous lie, and she was the only one who could see the bloodstains on the money that paid for it all. A month passed. The frantic, life-saving energy ebbed, replaced by the steady, blessed rhythm of recovery. Igioma was home, weak but radiant, holding court in their single room from her favorite armchair, holding Adaora's hand and telling her, over and over, how her brilliant daughter had saved her life. Each declaration was a lash, a loving, unknowing torture. Adaora tried to bury the memory. She threw herself into her old routines, the mind-numbing comfort of normalcy. She went to her copywriting job. She argued with her boss about ad campaigns for biscuit brands. She dodged Danfos on the road. She tried to be the girl from before, but that girl was gone. She moved through the world with a new, permanent filter over her eyes. The world before the money, and the world after. She was an imposter in her own life. The first intrusion was so mundane it was sinister. A plain, brown paper package, no return address, left for her at the reception of her office. Her name was written in a precise, unfamiliar hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, terrified drum. "He knows where I work." Inside, with no note, was a book. A first edition of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. It was a beautiful, weighty object. The cloth cover faded with time. Felt expensive. Felt like a violation. This wasn't a gift. It was a receipt. A reminder that the transaction was not just a memory for her. He was marking his territory, asserting that the connection, however vile, still existed. She felt a cold sweat break out on her back. With trembling hands, she shoved it deep into the bottom of her office wastebasket, burying it under discarded printouts and empty water bottles. She spent the rest of the day jumping at every phone ring, every footstep in the hallway. A week of tense silence followed. She started to breathe easier, to believe it was a one-off, a final flicker from a dying ember. Then the second intrusion arrived. A thick, cream-colored envelope, the paper heavy and expensive. The logo of the Nike Art Gallery was embossed on the back. Inside was an invitation to the exclusive opening of a new exhibition, New Voices in Nigerian Modernism. Scrawled at the bottom, in the same precise hand as the book's inscription, were the words, "Your perspective on this would be valuable." K.A. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. This was worse. This was a move into her world, a world of art and writing she considered sacred. He was trying to connect not to the body head bought, but to the mind head glimpsed in their initial meeting. It was a far more intimate invasion. She tore the invitation into a dozen tiny pieces and flushed it down the office toilet, watching the creamy fragments swirl away, wishing she could do the same with his memory. She was on high alert now, a gazelle sensing a predator it couldn't see. She avoided her office, called in sick. She jumped at shadows. She was certain he would appear next, stepping out of a sleek black SUV in front of her surreal apartment, a smile on his face that wasn't a smile. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. She was at home, helping her mother sort through old photographs, a painful exercise in nostalgia. The notification popped up on her phone. The sender was k.adeyemi@adeyemiholdings.com. Her blood ran cold. She excused herself, mumbling about work, and locked herself in the bathroom, sitting on the closed lid of the toilet, her hands shaking. The subject line was, "Read your piece in The Guardian." It was so ordinary, so casual. It wasn't about them. It was about a small op-ed piece Shed written weeks ago, critiquing the city's handling of public transportation. Shed forgotten Shed even written it. She opened it. "Miss Nwosu, I read your piece on the BRT system with interest. While your passion is commendable, your argument regarding municipal funding is, with respect, naive. You fail to account for the entrenched bureaucratic overhead that siphons allocated funds before they ever reach the intended projects. Attacking the symptom, poor buses, and not the disease, systemic graft, is a common error of idealistic commentators. A more potent argument would focus on the specific tendering process for the bus contracts and the known affiliations of the winning firms. The data is publicly available if one knows where to look. K.A. She read it 3 times. It was an intellectual critique, a challenge. There was no mention of the penthouse, of the money, of her body. It was the kind of email a professor might send a promising student. It was infuriating. It was brilliant. It was the perfect, disarming gambit. He hadn't sent her jewels or more expensive trinkets. He had engaged the one part of herself she valued most, her intellect. He had read her work, processed it, and deconstructed it. And he was right. His analysis was sharp, cutting directly to the heart of the issue in a way her emotional piece had not. The anger that flared in her was hot and clean, burning away some of the fear. How dare he? How dare he act like this was a normal correspondence between colleagues? How dare he be smart about it? Against every screaming instinct for self-preservation, against the voice in her head that told her to delete it and change her email address, she found her fingers typing a reply. It was not polite. It was not professional. It was pure, unfiltered fury channeled into words. Chief Adeyemi, idealism is not naivety. It is the necessary engine for demanding better. Your pragmatic analysis of graft reads like a manual for accepting corruption as an immutable law of nature, rather than a cancer to be cut out. Perhaps from the penthouse, the disease is easier to ignore. Down here on the buses, we have to live with the symptoms every day. She hit send with a satisfying stab of her finger. Let him see her anger. Let him know he couldn't just stroll back into her life with a book and a critique and expect. What did he expect? She waited, her heart pounding, for the backlash, for the cold reminder of their true dynamic. Came minutes later. Touché, Miss Nwosu. Perhaps we are both right. The disease must be diagnosed before it can be treated. My offer to provide the data on the tendering process stands. K.A. He hadn't risen to her anger. He had parried it. And in doing so, he had opened a door. Tiny, dangerous crack. And against her will, shivering on the bathroom floor, Ada Ora felt a terrifying flicker of something that wasn't fear or rage. It was intrigue. The email exchange became a secret war waged in the quiet moments of her day. A cold war of ideas fought from the bathroom, from her office after hours, from the dim glow of her phone while her mother slept soundly in the next bed. Each notification from Adeyemi@adeyemiholdings.com sent a jolt through her. A toxic cocktail of dread, anger, and that unwelcome, traitorous flicker of intrigue. She refused to let him have the last word. His offer of data was a Trojan horse, a way to make her indebted to him again, to shift the balance of power. She declined, but with a counterpunch. She went to the National Library, spent days buried in dusty public records and online archives, and unearthed the tendering data herself. Her next email was a detailed, footnoted dismantling of his cynical worldview, using the very information head offered as a weapon. The data, as you can see, doesn't just diagnose the disease. It names the patients. The winning firm for the last 3 contracts is a shell company linked to the former transport commissioner's brother-in-law. This isn't an immutable law of nature, Chief Adeyemi. It's theft, and it's prosecutable. His reply was swift. Impressive fieldwork, Miss Nwosu. You have a tenacity I admire. However, knowing the thief's name and seeing him arrested are 2 different things. The system is designed to protect its own. What is your proposed mechanism for accountability? The press, which is owned by his cousins. The police, who report to his uncle. It was infuriating. He was always 1 step ahead, using her own points to highlight the futility of the fight. But the fight itself was exhilarating. For the first time since her mother got sick, her mind was fully engaged, firing on all cylinders. She was not a victim or a commodity. She was an intellectual adversary worthy of a billionaire's time. The emails grew longer, more detailed. They spilled out of the confines of the BRT article. He critiqued a short story Shed once had published in a small literary journal, praising her character work but eviscerating the ending as sentimental. She fired back, defending her artistic choices with a passion that surprised her. He sent her a complex economic report on emerging markets in Africa and asked for her on-the-ground perspective. She tore it apart for its ivory tower assumptions. The medium shifted. An email became a lengthy text message debate that lasted all evening. A text message became a phone call. The first time her phone rang with his private number, her hand froze over it. Answering felt like a greater betrayal than the transaction itself. But the intellectual itch was too strong. She answered, her voice clipped and formal. Miss Nwosu, I'm in traffic on the 3rd mainland bridge and your point about import tariffs is stuck in my head. Explain it again. It wasn't a social call. It was a continuation of their debate. And so they talked. He had a razor-sharp mind, able to dissect an argument and pinpoint its weakest flaw in seconds. He was arrogant, condescending, and brilliant, and he listened to her retorts with a focus Shed never experienced from any man. He didn't listen to respond. He listened to understand, to engage, to debate. The first lunch was proposed by him, framed as a strategic session. This regulatory issue you've uncovered in the Lagos waste management contract, he said one night on the phone. It's more complex than your blog post suggests. There are historical precedents. Meet me. They'll show you the files. It was a blatant pretext. She knew it. He knew it. But the lure was irresistible. To be in a room with the actual documents, to have his formidable intellect focused on a problem she cared about. It was a siren's call. She agreed on her terms. A public place in the middle of the day. She wore her armor. A sharp, professional trouser suit. Her hair pulled back severely. He was already there, at a quiet table in the back of a restaurant in 6, a stack of folders and a tablet next to his plate. He looked every inch the CEO, but his eyes held a familiar, focused intensity. There were no pleasantries. He launched in immediately, spreading documents on the table between their lunch plates. See here the 2005 amendment. This is the loophole they've been exploiting for a decade. For 2 hours they talked. They argued over bylaws and civic responsibility. He showed her a side of Lagos Shed never seen. The intricate, corrupt web of deals and handshakes that truly made the city run. It was a masterclass in realpolitik from a man who operated at its highest levels. She held her own, challenging him, forcing him to defend his jaded perspectives. And in the middle of a heated point about public utilities, she made him laugh. A real, surprised, unfiltered bark of laughter that made the patrons at the next table glance over. You are, he said, shaking his head with a wry smile, the most stubborn woman I have ever met. The comment should have felt condescending. Didn't. Felt like a victory. She had breached the wall. She had seen a glimpse of the man behind the billionaire, the chief, the collector of experiences. She saw a mind trapped in a gilded cage, starved for a real challenge, for someone who wasn't afraid of him. Driving home, the high of the intellectual duel began to fade. replaced by a creeping unease. She had just spent 2 hours debating policy with the man who had coldly verified her virginity before paying for it. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. She had been seduced, not by charm or flowers, but by the one thing she valued most, the respect of a formidable intellect. He had engaged her mind so completely that she had almost forgotten what else he had engaged. She felt a profound sense of shame. She was dancing with her devil, and she was starting to enjoy the music. The unwanted pursuit was no longer an invasion. It had become a conversation, and she was terrified because she didn't want it to stop. The car was a silent, leather-lined cocoon, gliding through the chaotic Lagos night. The driver behind the partition was a ghost. Outside, the world was a vibrant, honking tapestry of life, but inside, the air was thick with everything left unsaid. They were returning from another working dinner, this one at an upscale place in Lekki where the sushi cost more than her monthly rent. The conversation had been its usual electric, frustrating self. Head critiqued her proposal for a public literacy project with brutal efficiency, and Shed defended it with equal parts passion and data. It was a familiar dance, one that left her mind buzzing and her pride both wounded and inflamed. But tonight, the high of the debate was failing her. The luxurious car, his effortless proximity, the sheer surreal normalcy of it all. It was a fiction, and the weight of the truth was crushing the air from her lungs. She stared out the window at the passing lights of the third mainland bridge, the dark water of the lagoon a void below. The ghost was in the car with them. It had been there for weeks, a silent, screaming presence at every lunch, in every email, on every phone call. She could feel him looking at her, his gaze a physical weight. He was waiting for her to pick up the thread of their last argument, to continue the game. She couldn't. The words were out of her mouth before she could stop them. Flat and hard, shattering the comfortable illusion. Why are you doing this? There was a beat of silence. The only sound was the soft hum of the engine. Doing what, Adaora? His voice was calm, measured. Having a conversation? This, she said, gesturing vaguely between them, still refusing to look at him. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. The emails, the lunches, the debate. Why? You got what you paid for. The transaction is complete. The balance sheet is settled. So why are you still here? She finally turned to face him. The interior light of the car cast his sharp features in shadow, making him look more severe, more imposing. But she saw it now, a flicker of something in his eyes that wasn't arrogance. It was unease. He didn't answer immediately. He looked out his own window, his jaw tight. The silence stretched, becoming heavy, uncomfortable. You believe that's all it was? He finally said, his voice lower, stripped of its usual confident timbre. A simple transaction. What else could it possibly be? The question was a challenge, laced with all the bitterness and shame Shed been suppressing. You outlined the terms yourself. A unique experience. A single, discrete transaction. No further contact. I was the product. You were the buyer. It was the most dehumanizing experience of my life. And now you want to talk about import tariffs and literary criticism? Why? She was breathing heavily, the anger Shed used as a shield finally cracking open, revealing the raw, wounded thing beneath. He turned back to her, and the look on his face was one she had never seen before. It wasn't the cold analyst or the bored billionaire. It was a man staring into an abyss of his own making. You think I don't know that? The words were quiet, almost ragged. You think I have sat through every one of those lunches, listened to you eviscerate my arguments with that brilliant, stubborn fire, and not felt the ghost of that night in the room with us? He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of profound weariness. I have spent my life collecting things, companies, properties, art, experiences. I thought that was what I was doing with you, acquiring another rare item for the vault, a story to tell myself. He paused, his dark eyes holding hers, and in them, she saw a shocking vulnerability. But you were not an experience, Adaora. You were a cataclysm. The word hung in the air between them, vast and terrifying. I went there for a transaction, he continued, his voice gaining a raw intensity. I left with an education, the coldness you felt from me. It was the only way I knew how to navigate such a thing. It was a performance for myself as much as for you. But your silence that night, your dignity even in that humiliation. He shook his head, as if still bewildered by it. You didn't sell your dignity. You laid it down as a bridge for your mother to walk back to life. I was the fool who thought I was buying a thing, when I was merely the toll paid for a miracle. You humbled me. He looked away, out at the dark water again. These lunches, these emails, they are not a pursuit. They are a penance. And they are a selfish, desperate attempt to see if the man you debate with is a man you could ever look at without seeing the monster from that night. The car fell silent. The truth, finally spoken, was a physical thing between them, immense and fragile. All her anger, her defenses, crumbled to dust. He wasn't trying to seduce her. He was trying to atone. He was haunted, too. She saw it then, not as the victim, but as a witness. The immense, isolating loneliness of his gilded cage. The hunger for something real that had driven him to her in the first place. The shame he carried, not for the act, but for the profound misjudgment of it. The car pulled up to her street in Suralire. The contrast between his world and hers never more stark. The driver killed the engine, leaving them in silence. Edaora didn't move. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since that night in the penthouse. She saw the man, not the billionaire. Flawed, arrogant, lonely, and utterly, devastatingly sincere in his regret. She didn't have an answer for him. She didn't know if she could ever look at him without seeing that night. But for the first time she saw something else too. A glimmer of the man he might have been, and might still become, if given a reason to try. Without a word, she opened the door and stepped out into the humid, familiar air of her world, leaving him alone in the dark, silent car with the ghost they now shared. Igioma's recovery was a beautiful, fragile thing. With each passing day, she reclaimed a little more of herself. She started cooking small meals again, the familiar sense of pepper soup and jollof rice, weaving a comforting tapestry of normalcy through their small home. She held her head higher, her eyes brighter. The constant shadow of pain finally lifted. But with returning strength came returning perception. The mother's instinct, dulled by sickness, was now sharp and alert. She noticed things. She noticed the sleek, black SUV that sometimes idled at the end of their street, a spaceship that had landed in their dusty neighborhood. She noticed the way Edaora would sometimes stare into the middle distance, her phone clutched in her hand, a complicated expression on her face. Not the worry of before, but something deeper, more turbulent. And she found the book. It was a different one. Not the Achebi first edition Edaora had thrown away, but a later, less conspicuous volume of poetry by J.P. Clark, left carelessly in Edaora's bag. Inscribed on the flyleaf in that same precise, powerful hand, for the most stubborn woman in Lagos. K.A. Igioma held the book, her fingers tracing the inscription. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather crept up her spine. K. This wasn't a foundation. Foundations didn't send personal notes in books of poetry. This was a man. That evening, as they shared a meal of rice and stew, Igioma placed the book on the table between them. The air in the room shifted instantly. Edaora, she began, her voice soft but firm. My child, we need to talk. Edaora's fork stilled. Her eyes flicked from the book to her mother's face, and Igioma saw it. A flash of pure, unvarnished panic. This foundation, Igioma continued, her heart aching at the fear in her daughter's eyes. They are very personal. Who is K.A.? The lie? The beautiful, life-saving lie that had sustained them for months, finally cracked. Edaora opened her mouth, perhaps to spin another tale, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of the secret, the shame, the terror of this moment, was too much. Her face crumpled. A single, ragged sob escaped her, and then the dam broke. She didn't narrate it like a story. It came out in fractured, painful pieces, between great, heaving sobs that racked her entire body. The desperation, the online post, the meeting at the hotel, the penthouse, the cold, clinical verification, the 2 billion naira, the name Chief Kola Adeyemi. Ijeoma listened, her own food forgotten, her hand pressed to her mouth. With each halting, agonizing confession, she felt her own heart splinter. She didn't see a woman telling a story. She saw her little girl, her brilliant, proud Adaora, shattering before her eyes. When Adaora finished, she was curled in on herself on the floor, her head buried in her knees, her body trembling with the force of her tears. The room was silent except for her ragged breathing. Ijeoma did not shout. She did not recoil in horror. She slowly slid from her chair and onto the floor beside her daughter. She wrapped her arms around Adaora's shaking shoulders and pulled her into a fierce, crushing embrace. "Oh, my baby," she whispered, her own tears falling onto Adaora's hair. "My brave, foolish, beautiful child, what have you done? What have you done for me?" It was not a question of judgment, but of anguish. The weight of the sacrifice settled on Ijeoma's own shoulders, a crushing burden of love paid for with a piece of her daughter's soul. She rocked her gently, as she had when Adaora was a child, whispering words of comfort that felt utterly inadequate. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry you carried this alone." It was at this precise moment of raw, unfiltered agony that a soft knock came at the door. Adaora flinched, scrambling to her feet, wiping frantically at her tear-streaked face. Ijeoma stood too, her body trembling, a protective fury beginning to burn through her grief. Adaora opened the door. Chief Kola Adeyemi stood on their threshold. He was out of place, a vision in a tailored jacket and dark trousers against the chipped paint and dusty corridor. He held a small file, another pretext about some civic data, no doubt. A faint, almost hopeful smile touched his lips, which died the instant he saw her face. His eyes moved from her red-rimmed, devastated eyes to Ijeoma standing behind her, her own face a mask of tear-streaked maternal fury. He saw the book of poetry on the table. He saw the shattered remains of their shared secret lying in the space between them. He understood instantly. The confident billionaire vanished. In his place stood a man caught in a terrible private storm not of his making. His usual aura of impenetrable control evaporated. His shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. The file in his hand seemed to grow heavy. His gaze dropped to the floor, and in that moment, he looked not powerful, but profoundly exposed. He had gotten a glimpse of the true cost of his transaction, not the monetary one, but the human wreckage it had left in its wake. He saw the love between mother and daughter, fractured and bleeding because of him. He saw the real world, in all its painful, messy glory, and his place in it was that of the destroyer. The three of them stood frozen in a devastating tableau. The daughter who had sold herself, the mother whose life was the price, and the man who had brokered the deal. Without a word, his carefully constructed persona in tatters, Kola Adeyemi gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement of the devastation he was witnessing, and turned away. His footsteps echoed down the stairwell, leaving behind a silence more profound and more telling than any apology could ever be. A week of silence followed the devastating confrontation. It was a thick, heavy quiet that filled the small Surrealire apartment, broken only by the necessary, careful words between a mother and daughter navigating a new, painful reality. The miracle of Ijeoma's health was now forever intertwined with the horror of its procurement. They were healing, but the scar tissue was thick and sensitive. Adaora expected the silence from Kola to be permanent. She had seen the shame on his face, the utter demolition of his carefully constructed worldview as he stood in their doorway. She assumed that was the end. The ghost had been seen and it had fled. So, when his text message arrived, it was a shock. "I would like to see you. Not in my world. In yours. Show me." It wasn't a command. It was a request. A plea. She stared at the words for a long time. Her first instinct was to delete it, to block the number, to finally seal that tomb. But the memory of his face, stripped bare of all arrogance, filled with a raw, unexpected shame, stopped her. Against her better judgment, against the protective fury of her mother, she agreed. She would give him one final hour, for closure, to prove to herself that the man she'd debated with was a phantom. She did not take him to a restaurant in Victoria Island. She took him to a bukka in Abalan she'd known since childhood. It was a place of loud, vibrant chaos, where the air was thick with the smoke of sizzling suya and the rich, earthy scent of boiled yam and egusi soup. The tables were rough-hewn wood, sticky with palm oil, and the sound was a symphony of yelling cooks, clattering plates, and the boisterous laughter of people who weren't worried about which fork to use. He arrived alone, having clearly dismissed his driver. He looked absurdly out of place. His casual clothes, a simple linen shirt and trousers, were still too expensive, too crisp for this environment. People stared, not with recognition, but with curiosity at the strange sight of a man who clearly belonged in an air-conditioned tower. He didn't flinch. He followed her to a table in the corner, his eyes taking everything in, the energy, the life, the sheer, unvarnished authenticity of it. He didn't look disgusted. He looked fascinated. They ordered umla and yudu with chunks of meat, eating with their hands from the same communal plate as was the custom. He was clumsy at first, fumbling with the smooth, stretchy umla, but he watched her and learned, his focus intense. He didn't try to talk business or politics. He asked her about the place. How long had it been here? Who was the woman shouting orders behind the counter? For the first time, they weren't Chief Adeyemi and the girl had paid for. They were just two people sharing a meal. The noise of the bukka was a shield, protecting them from the weight of their history. When the food was gone and they were sipping sweet, frothy maltina from the bottle, the noise seemed to recede around them, creating a pocket of quiet. He looked at her, his gaze serious, his fingers tracing a pattern in the condensation on his bottle. "I have spent my life building fortresses," he began, his voice low, meant only for her. "Fortresses of money, of companies, of silence. I thought they protected me. They only imprisoned me. I thought the most valuable things in the world were the ones with the highest price tags." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "I was wrong." He took a deep breath. "What I did was transactional. It was the act of a man who had forgotten what real value was. What I feel for you, that is not a transaction. Can't be bought or sold. It is the most real thing I have ever encountered." Adeora's heart was hammering. She wanted to stop him, to run, but she was rooted to the spot. "You didn't just save your mother's life that night, Adeora. In your courage, in your devastating sacrifice, you showed me my own poverty. You have a strength I will never have, a heart I can only aspire to deserve." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper, the sounds of the bukka fading into a distant hum. "Marry me." The words hung in the air, simple and impossible. "Not because I owe you a debt. Not because you owe me one. Not for any reason other than this. I am a lonely, wealthy fool, and you are the most complete person I have ever met. Marry me so I can spend every day of the rest of my life trying to become a man who is worthy of a fraction of your courage. Not in my world. Let's build a new one together. Something real." It wasn't a proposal offered on a knee with a diamond. It was a confession, a surrender. It was offered here, in this noisy, messy, real place that was her anchor, not his. He wasn't asking her to join his life. He was asking for permission to join hers. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of shame or anger. They were tears of something else entirely, something fragile and terrifying and hopeful. She looked at this powerful, broken man, sitting amidst the chaos of a Oberland bukka, offering her his entire world in exchange for a chance at redemption, and she saw not the monster from the penthouse, but the man who had been humbled by her love for her mother. She didn't say yes, not yet, but for the first time she didn't say no. She reached across the sticky table and placed her hand over his. It was an answer in itself, a beginning. The society pages called it the wedding of the decade. Fairy tale. Photographs splashed across glossy magazines showed a radiant Adeora, breathtaking in a custom-designed Nigerian lace gown, her smile luminous. They showed a fiercely handsome Chief Adeyemi. His usual severe expression softened into something resembling awe as he looked at his bride. The ceremony at the National Mosque and the cathedral were a masterclass in interfaith diplomacy. The reception at the Eco Hotel was a who's who of Nigerian high society. Governors, titans of industry, Nollywood royalty, all there to witness the billionaire finally fall. But for Adaora and Kola, the real marriage happened in the quiet moments the cameras never saw. It happened in the fierce, tearful conversation with Ijeoma the night before the wedding, where a mother's fear and pride and love collided, and where Kola, without a hint of his usual arrogance, sat and listened and promised, with a quiet gravity that brooked no doubt, to protect and cherish her daughter until his last breath. It happened in the prenuptial agreement he insisted upon, a document that was the antithesis of their beginning. It granted her a staggering settlement, yes, but its true purpose was to be a tangible, legal promise that she was entering this union from a position of power, not need. "This is yours," Head said, pushing the papers toward her. "Always, no matter what." And it happened in the way they built their life, not in the sterile perfection of his penthouse, but in a new home that felt like a fusion of their worlds. A spacious, airy house in Ikoyi filled with light and the vibrant, modern art she loved, but which was always filled with the smells of Ijeoma's cooking and the sound of her laughter, as she lived with them in a lavish, self-contained wing. Adaora Nwosu did not become a trophy wife. She became a partner. She refused to be absorbed into the mindless cycle of brunches and spa days that defined the lives of so many of her new peers. The 2 billion Naira, the blood money that had started it all, became her tool. She established the Ijeoma Foundation. It was not a vague, distant charity. It was a hands-on, fiercely efficient organization dedicated to one thing: preventing anyone else from having to make the choice she had made. It paid for dialysis, for transplants, for medications for thousands of Nigerians. It built dialysis centers in underserved communities and funded research into kidney disease prevention. She used the Adeyemi name not for social clout, but as a battering ram to break through bureaucratic red tape and demand accountability from hospital administrators. She was no longer Adaora, the victim of a transaction. She was Mrs. Adeyemi, the terrifyingly efficient philanthropist who knew the system's flaws intimately because she had been crushed by them. Her past was not a shameful secret. It was the fuel for her mission. Kola watched her with a pride that dwarfed any Head ever felt for a business acquisition. He was her biggest supporter, his sharp business mind now deployed to optimize her foundation's operations, his powerful connections leveraged for her cause. He would often sit in on her meetings, saying nothing, just watching her command the room with a passion and intelligence that left seasoned executives scrambling to keep up. Their love was not a simple, easy thing. It was a complex tapestry woven with threads of darkness and light, of shame and redemption. There were nights when the ghost of the penthouse would visit her, and she would wake up trembling. He would hold her then, not with empty platitudes, but with a shared silence, acknowledging the pain that was the foundation of their strange, beautiful union. There were times his cynicism would clash with her idealism, and their debates would shake the windows of their beautiful home, but they always ended in a deeper understanding, a harder one: respect. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real. They had started in the darkest of places, a relationship founded on the most profound imbalance of power imaginable. But through honesty, through a shared determination to forge a new path, they had built something strong and true. She had not been rescued by a billionaire. She had, in the most brutal way imaginable, rescued herself, and in doing so, she had offered a drowning man a rope. And he, humbled and redeemed by her love, had chosen to build a life with her on solid ground, not in a gilded cage. Their story was no longer one of a transaction, but a testament to the fact that even from the most barren and poisoned soil, something beautiful and strong could grow. Together, they were a different kind of union,